Alrighty. Hi everyone across our platforms. As we trickle in, I want to first start my recording so I don't forget.
Recording in progress.
All right, there we go. Hi everyone, welcome to today's Intro to Resistance class. We're going to be talking about genre frameworks. And so while people trickle in, I'm going to go ahead and put up today's question that I want for you all to take a second to stop and answer as folks continue to trickle in. We're going to take only about 5 minutes, and that will be here. If anybody did miss their homework, yes, just submit it. It's totally okay. There was no homework for this week. I pushed it back to what we're going to go over today because I wanted to make sure you guys had the correct context. So if you didn't submit something, it's okay. Just submit it later whenever you get a chance. And yeah, so what I'm going to have you guys do is... There we go. I want for you all to, thank you y'all. I want for you all to think about what the difference is between the Black Lives Matter movement and Black Lives Matter as the hashtag. So we're going to take 5 minutes as people continue to trickle in. And I want for y'all to think about this question. Instagram, my graphic's a little slow, so it'll take a second for you all to see it. But the question is, what is the difference, if you feel like there's any, between Black Lives Matter and hashtag Black Lives Matter? I'd love to be able to sing you guys some background music, but again, we would get in trouble. So there we go. Go ahead and type your responses. And you can send them in the chat or message them to me privately. I should be able to see it on most of these platforms. All right, I'm gonna give y'all 2 more minutes. All right, I got a couple of messages. I see one in Instagram. Go ahead and click send. You guys have 1 more minute. And if you don't know, you can simply say, I don't know. And that is a completely acceptable answer. Cool. Okie dokie. So, if you did not submit your answer because you were confused, please let me know. Yes, it's okay to not be able to answer. That is actually fully okay. So the reason why I asked this question, it's always okay to say you don't know. I promise you, I'll never penalize you for saying you don't know. I would much rather people say that they don't know than say that they do and they don't. Okay, I'm having a hard time with my iPad, so we're just gonna have to... Sorry, y'all on TikTok. I feel like TikTok always gets pushed to the back. I'm sorry. My iPad needs to charge, but I don't have a way to hold this up while I'm doing this. I'll just hold it in my hand. So, one of the examples that was sent on Instagram is one is a statement of truth in racism, one is a hashtag. Another one is a fact, and the other can be used to encourage conversation on social media. So when we talk about genres of resistance, what we're going to be looking at today is really going to give everybody, I hope, the tools to be able to answer this question more specifically and in more detail. By the end of this, I hope that you all will be able to categorize things, because today we're going to talk about the difference between a movement in terms of a large-scale movement and an organization. And these are going to be some important distinctions to make because of the fact that not only will it allow for people to be a little bit more specific in our language, but also typically whenever you have a lessening of a distinction, it can cause some issues, which we'll go over. So, back to our presentation. So, when we talk about the movement versus an action, up here on the image, and again, sorry, Instagram, you guys are going to get everything a little bit slower, but up here on the screen, I have put a picture of Patrisse Cullors and Alicia Garza and I forgot her name, please don't get upset with me, who are the founders of the Black Lives Matter hashtag and the Black Lives Matter movement. And on the right side, we have a graphic that was used in 2020 post George Floyd that shows a few different images and other ways in which people used the Black Lives Matter movement in a way to express their frustration and the other things that were going on with, all of these things that were happening. So when we have these two distinctions, they are really enough for us to give this way forward for us to be able to continue to categorize things. And like I said, today is all about discussing the genres. Ooh. There we go. There we go. So in 2013, that is thought as the start date for the Black Lives Matter movement, anything. This is whenever it was said that the conversation started whenever there was the usage of the quote by Alicia Garza on Facebook after George Zimmerman was acquitted for killing Trayvon Martin. And so when all of this happened, one of the first things that she ended up doing was posting her upset. She said, and again, for those of you this is loading for, it says, outraged and saddened after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, the Florida man who killed a black teenager in 2012 in Oakland, California. And it said, Black Lives Matter. After this happened, Patrisse Cullors decided to respond with the hashtag Black Lives Matter under the post. And when she responded with this hashtag underneath the post, this is whenever we saw it take off and become this more wider known thing that was a large part of the reason why this ended up becoming not just a national movement, but an international movement to bring attention to racial justice, to bring attention to all of these different things that we now can categorize underneath systematic racism, systemic oppression, that kind of a thing. And after the hashtag was used, these three people that gathered together ended up forming the Black Lives Matter organization. But there has been a lot of discussion as to who owns Black Lives Matter and where the roots come from. And while we can point to 2013 being the first time that the phrase Black Lives Matter was used explicitly like this online, the actual formation of the organization is a little bit more muddled and is a little bit confusing. Now, the reason is a couple of different things, but whenever they first started this hashtag, before they actually formed the organization, which some people point to it forming in 2013, while the Black Lives Matter Global Foundation wasn't formed until 2020. With that being said, there ended up being a large amount of individual organizations that popped up across the country that were called Black Lives Matter we could say Santa Clarita, or, well, actually, no, that is a Black Lives Matter chapter that is sanctioned. But we'll say Black Lives Matter Wakanda, right? Just so that I don't accidentally name a place that does have a chapter or doesn't have a sanctioned chapter. And so if you have a Black Lives Matter Wakanda, you end up having this organization that's underneath the name of something that's not actually affiliated with it. And a lot of these organizations, when they popped up at first, before the formation was actually official, ended up causing kind of a little bit of a disruption. Because in media, and I didn't want to show some of this because we're not going to uplift some of the nonsense, but in media, you saw people start to say that Black Lives Matter was stealing money. You heard people starting to distance themselves from the phrase Black Lives Matter. You heard people trying to weaponize the usage of the term Black Lives Matter. And at one point, if people had a negative interaction with a person or an organization that was affiliated with Black Lives Matter, people would use that towards the entire movement. So you had a conflation of issues that was happening consistently, and it was causing a lot of problems. And still to this day, we suffer from a conflation of issues. So what I'm teaching you guys today is what I've come up with, and everybody should be able to see this on all the screens. This is the genre resistance framework. This is what I call a structure for us to be able to talk about the difference between a detached movement and an attached movement. And this might seem complicated at first, but hopefully after the assignments today, for those of you who would like to look further, it will help us clarify a lot of these things. When we talk about anything happening underneath resistance, there is always going to be a category. Whether or not we call it a category or not, it exists. Whether or not we consider it, whether or not we recognize it, it is there and it is present. So on one side of my categorization, we have things that are detached. And when you have something that's detached, it can either be detached from the mainstream movement or detached from an organization. This can be an individual or a group of people, and we'll go over some of this in a second. On the right side, you have things that are attached to a movement, attached to an organization, one or the other. And you have things that are done by individuals within that or by groups within that. And this is going to be very, very, very important the longer we go in this course. I will also, again, have these graphs up everywhere. Don't worry. If you guys want the information, you can always get it. You just got to let me know, especially if you are not somebody who is fully signed up for the course yet. There we go. So one of the examples that I want for folks to think about, and I am sure that people will know that, sorry, again, TikTok. I'm sure that people would know the instance of this, but they may not know the name. So if you all are familiar, there's a man named Muntadhar al-Zaidi. I think I pronounced that correctly. If I did not, somebody please let me know. But he is notable for one very, very iconic moment, and that is throwing a shoe at President George Bush. Sorry, y'all can't see the clip on here. So, some of you all may remember this, but he was protesting everything that was going on with the United States and us causing trouble as a country in the Middle East. And amidst the conversation of George Bush giving a statement, and he had a press conference, this journalist decided to take both of his shoes off and throw them at George Bush. Now, some of us have seen this, especially if you're an older Gen Z or a millennial, really as like just a really consistently visual moment, because of the fact that it was not only somebody throwing something at a United States president, but also the meaning behind it, and the fact that he, as somebody who is from one of these Arabic countries, as somebody who has dealt with his family, dealing with the consequences deliberately coming out of the United States' choice to invade Iraq, Iran, and all of these other things, he was infuriated by what President Bush was saying at the time. And it was very, very strong of a reaction, because not only were people furious at him specifically for throwing a shoe, but also because of the meaning of shoe throwing. And when we talk about the meaning of shoe throwing, the history of shoe throwing in certain countries is very, very, very deep. There is a history of throwing shoes all across the world, but especially whenever we talk about places that are in Asian countries, places that have Arabic influence, and even in African countries, there's this idea that you're taking something that is the lowest of the low, something that you walk around in, right? Something that is disgusting, and you are throwing it at people. Their kings have had shoes thrown at them. There have been other military leaders, especially in ancient times, that have had shoes thrown at them. So shoe throwing in and of itself is a very specific, iconic thing, but it's not necessarily something that we would consider attached to a specific movement. We would consider shoe throwing itself as potentially being a form of resistance, but something that is perpetuated by an individual in a different context. Yes, there are a lot. If you look up, and I'll include some of these in the email afterwards, but I want to make sure I have the right sources for you all. If you look up shoe throwing, there are many instances historically of people throwing shoes, and some of them were cultural norms to the point where they aren't even necessarily highly documented, because it's similar to people burning a flag. Flag burnings were not specifically always documented because flag burnings have happened so many times that they don't necessarily make news on their own. And so when we look at why this matters, right, you guys might be like, okay, what does this have to do with anything? Why does this even matter? The reason why this matters is because, again, the structure that we create in the conversations around movement building determine the effectiveness that we are able to have in the conversations of movement building. And when we are talking about the effectiveness of movement building, we also want to be able to look back and understand historically what we do or don't have. So another important example is when we talk about women's suffrage, right? Immediately, most people will be like, yes, women's suffrage, women walking around in white, all of these things. We don't talk about how fractured the language was in women's suffrage movements. For example, this is tiny even for me. I wonder if you guys can view this. I'm going to make this big so I can read it. So if you look at this, a lot of people don't realize that there are a lot of movements that, because the United States is the child of Britain, as I always say, the defunct child of Britain, there are a lot of notes of our movements whenever it comes to concepts like abolition and women's rights and children's labor rights that come directly out of Britain or England or wherever you want to say when it comes to that European area. And the suffrage movement is another one of those things. So in the suffrage movement, there is actually a splinter, let me actually go here so you guys can see, of terminology, of some people saying that they were suffragettes, but not suffragists. And this was a huge distinction. This was not a small distinction. This was a absolutely huge distinction. The difference between these two were essentially the level of engagement and the willingness to essentially use physical means as a weapon. So, and one of the phrases that went really popular was deeds, not words. You may be familiar with Deeds, Not Words, the organization started by Wendy Davis in Texas. There are a couple of other organizations, I think, that hold that name. But deeds, not words was actually a phrase used during this suffragette movement in England to fight back, saying essentially that they were going to use physical means of action to get women's freedom. They were not going to just do something that was conversational. They were going to show you that women's suffrage was one of the most important things. And so there was an increase of militant action to gain women's right to vote. And this was a very serious thing. And so with some of the suffragettes, and let me go back to this quote that you guys can see on some of these. With some of the suffragettes, you could be a suffragette and be a suffragist, but just because you were a suffragist doesn't mean you were a suffragette. Suffragettes were those who were thought to use more of the physical means. And this distinction is so interesting because you look at the categorization, and it also allows for us to dive deeper into some of the disagreements in the movement space. Now, I know for some of you, if I bring up the women's suffrage movement, you're going to be like, what in the world? And you're probably going to be a little bit frustrated because, at least for me, anytime I hear of the suffrage movement, my immediate thought is going to go towards the heavy levels of racism that exist within the suffrage movement. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and some of the iconic people of the American suffrage movement were vehement racists. Deep vehement racists. They did not like Black people. Most notably, I shouldn't laugh at that, but I think for you all, you know how ironic it is to see this kind of thing where somebody who is oppressed is still engaging in oppression against another group. So one of these quotes, and I've enlarged this for everybody to see, Susan B. Anthony once famously stated, "I will cut off this right arm of mine before I will work for or even demand the ballot of the Negro and not the woman." The racism of the suffragette movement is very well documented, undeniably, and a lot of white suffragette strategy included being able to distance themselves from Black people, and especially Black women. And that does not mean that there were not Black suffragists or Black suffragettes or Black suffragists. But and can you all on Instagram hear me now? Hopefully you all can hear me now. Sorry, I have a sibling calling me 3 times while I am on a class. I am on a class. Okay, awesome. Glad you guys can hear now. So one of the reasons why we talk about this is also going to be important for this distinction as well, because it allows for us to associate or disassociate certain movements from the actions, and it allows for us to also recognize some of the harm in conflating those two. Now, on here, what I have also is about the abolition movements. Like I stated before, a lot of the roots, at least for some of the legal structures for abolition movements, came from England as well. So abolition wasn't just a Black movement. It wasn't a movement just necessarily for the abolition of slavery, but abolitionism and abolitionists still exist to this day. But it's really about a removal from all systems of harm. It's about rebuilding things from a community mindset and so many other things. But when we talk about the abolition movement of this time period, we look at the fact that this was something that was deeply involved in stopping exploitation of people, which at the time period was done most highly with enslaved people in the United States. There are some people that were abolitionists that were working towards trying to get the United States to a sense of consistency, especially whenever we talk about a post-American Revolution world, and being able to call out and say, hey, what are we doing if we say everybody should be free? What are we doing when we say everybody should essentially be a part of a free country, but we still have people that are enslaved? And even after slavery was abolished in the form that we knew it was, at least chattel slavery was abolished in that form, we still had some of the same issues that were reoccurring in all of this. But that's a different conversation that we'll have later. Okay, so with that being said, the part of the movements that we talk about whenever it comes to this come directly out of England. And so that is another connection, because our abolition movement looked a little bit different, but also the terminology changed as we had our own abolition movement building, and as it built off some of the stamina of the England abolition movement. Another fun small fact is there are some places where we were able to abolish slavery as we know it then, because we like to use that terminology because technically slavery is still legal in the United States. We'll have a conversation about it later for folks that are more interested. But there are a couple of really great books on this that I can give you guys. The 13th documented by Ava DuVernay Jones, Great example. But as it was abolished at that time period, as we knew it, there were a lot of moments in which people in the United States were able to leverage the fact that England had abolished slavery as a way to engage in legal freedoms. We'll talk about this whenever we talk about some of the at-sea rebellions of enslaved people, where they were able to say, hey, look, we're an English colony. The Amistad Rebellion did this. We're an English colony. And if we're near this English colony, or we're a part of this English colony, and their, slavery is abolished, then we're not slaves under this law. And that's one of the legal forms of resistance that we'll talk about as well in the next coming weeks with the next upcoming lessons. Another thing, and this is, a great quote on the screen that I've included for those of you on here. Sorry, on TikTok again. But it says the connection between slave resistance and abolition in the United States was proximate and continuous because of the fact that abolition was not necessarily tied solely to slavery prior. Fugitive slaves united all factions of the movement and led abolitionists to justify revolutionary resistance to slavery. So people being able to call abolition this movement that was very intentional made it easier to actually get people on the side of fighting for the freedoms of enslaved people. And that's really, really, really going to be key. Everything is key. But so when I say, why does this matter, right? I ask you, what does any of this have to do with anything? You said a whole lot of words, but girl, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, when I say, why does this matter? It is because of the fact that when a movement is conflated solely with an organization or an individual, we may lose its meaning or reduce its overall impact. So like I said before, if you think about the women's suffrage movement as some type of movement led by a bunch of racist white women who were in charge, who didn't care about other people, then it may reduce some of the impact and the roles that other people had in that movement. And it doesn't allow for us to see the widespread impact. The same thing happens when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We look at it, and if we look at it and think, oh, there's this organization, it started by some people in it did something bad potentially, therefore the entire movement should be disregarded, it destroys all of the work that people are doing everywhere. And it's a very dangerous thing for us to lean into. So it is something that is important when we categorize, because the more we categorize and the more that we make sure that meaning is attributed to the right places, the more likely we are going to be able to build movements moving forward and to make sure that things are historically accurate. And historical accuracy is one of the most important things that we can have in anything. Education spaces, history spaces, whatever you want to call it. Because if we don't have historical accuracy, what happens is whoever the victors were, whoever the people were that took that reign, are able to recontextualize things in a way that is false, in a way that provides more disenfranchisement, in a way that makes people more likely to be unmotivated, to be sad, to be depressed, to not realize the tools that we have, to not see the success of these things. So us being able to recategorize is really, really, really important. And yes, Rosie said, would the history of the origins of Planned Parenthood and their current work be a good example? Yes, it would. Things just like that, whenever we talk about the distinction between the roots and the current structures and how they may have developed. There are things right now that we have in the United States and across the world in general that may have roots that were weird or gross or disgusting. And we don't erase those roots. But sometimes the roots can be useful, because if the roots are in something that is problematic, it can affect what you're doing now. But if an individual maybe that was a part of it is no longer a part of that thing, then that may remove some of the impact. So it's a complicated thing, but I want for us to continue to kind of sit with this and brainstorm with this, because it's going to allow for us to set ourselves up for everything that is going to be very, very, very useful. So this is actually another class discussion moment. So I want for folks to think, all right, take a few minutes, sit here, do the little do. What's that mean? I think it's Cynthia River where she's like, but take a second and do the little do and think of some types of movements versus organizations, or individual actions versus detached actions. I'm going to keep talking, but I want for you all to start putting this in your head, because some of the examples that I have for you all in your homework assignment, I am very, very, very excited about, because some of my favorite people and some of my favorite moments are going to be very, very useful for making sure that you all digest this. So one example, there is an iconic escape from slavery that you guys might be familiar with, you may not, and it is of the man who mailed himself to freedom. His name is Henry Box Brown, and Henry Box Brown literally shipped himself in a box and decided to mail himself to an area where he would be free. And that specific action that he took helped start, not only did it have backlash that came with it, of course, as anything in this world, but it also allowed for us to develop a much stronger strategy whenever it came to utilizing different methods of finding freedom. And so while his action, it's going to be up to you guys to decide if it was attached or detached to a movement, but whether it was attached or detached, the effect that it had and the way that it was inspired or not inspired is very interesting. Another example when we think of this is Rosa Parks, right? A lot of folks, I would argue 85% of people, if not 95%, have been taught that Rosa Parks got on the bus and she sat down because she was tired. And she decided she was not going to do anything else because she was done for the day. Like, that's, people will say it was spur of the moment. It was not planned. It was completely just this spur of the moment. I already said the word unplanned, but you guys know what I mean. Just this thing that she just felt like doing without recognizing that it actually had a structure. And there were other people who had done sit-ins prior to Rosa. One of the ones is Recy Taylor. And there were other people who decided prior that were unattached to a specific movement that this was something that they were tired of dealing with. So when Rosa Parks actually did that, she was doing it as attached to a movement. She was doing it as a fully attached action as an individual, but also in conjunction with an organization. And that kind of categorization is really important, because if we think of Rosa Parks as just sitting down one day, what does that do to us? It makes us think, okay, she just did something with no planning. She did not prepare anything. She went, she spoke her mind. There were no negative consequences because of it. She did not get beaten. She did not get all of these things. And it's just because she stood up. And that's not true. Because when we have structure for certain types of movements, it allows for people to have safety measures in place. And that's not to say that you always have to have a safety measure, right? Revolution and protest and all of these different things and resistance, they can have very, very different intentions. They have very different structures. And they also can have different outcomes due to the way that those structures unfold. For Rosa Parks, she was prepared. She knew what was going to happen. She had an exact moment planned in mind. And that was really imperative to her being able to move forward and say, hey, I did this thing. I already had national coverage prepared for it. I already knew that this was going to be done. Somebody knew where I was going to be. Someone knew I was going to be safe. And you'll see this happen with a lot of movements that people do, like die-ins. Sorry, let's wait for a second. Like die-ins, where people will go and fake pass out in like a public official's office. A lot of those people, when they do a die-in, will have a plan. They will have told people, they'll have lawyers' numbers written on their arms. They have a plan and they're prepared. And it's not that something can't be prepared if you're an individual, but if you are doing it as an individual and you're detached from something, you may not have the same protective structure either. And it doesn't mean that that's bad, but it depends on what your goal is and what that looks like. Nat Turner's revolt is an example of something that is an individual and a collective form of resistance. Let me put this chart back up. That he did without it being anything formal. But his action specifically helped lead to a large amount of people that were able to then become inspired. I talk about this and I have it in assignments, but The Birth of a Nation is one of the most dangerous pieces of visual media, I would argue ever in the history of the United States. I think that's not an extreme jump. And The Birth of a Nation is essentially a racist retelling of Nat Turner's revolt. And it gives him this characterization of being this black man that just went around trying to just kill white women and just wanted to rape people and murder people. And when that video went viral for the time period, that movie, that film that was created, it ended up revitalizing the Ku Klux Klan. So while the KKK had decreased their amount, and by, the early 1900s, the structure kind of weakened a little bit. People weren't as openly doing things. At least they were keeping their faces covered still. There's a whole thing. It's a very complicated time period. that movie helped revitalize, when it went revitalize the KKK. And with it, they started doing screenings, like nighttime screenings regularly of it across the country. People were seeing it in droves. And that individual action that Nat Turner took that was detached to a movement ended up creating organized movements that were helpful in order to gain freedom. And he did this before slavery was abolished as we know it. So if you think about the fact that even 100 years after, the movie that was made to mischaracterize what he did was still launching more racist attacks, that's a really important thing, especially when we look at classification. Another example I'll give, thank you, and you guys were always going to give extra history facts. Thank you, Victor. Another example that's important to look at, and we'll have a little bit of a lesson on this. If anybody wants the firsthand archives on this, I do have them if anybody ever wants them and is curious. But another example is the fact that eventually they started calling slave revolts stampedes. And I have a video on this somewhere. I'll repost this week and make sure that everybody gets access to it. But what's your thought whenever someone calls a group of people a stampede? Like just type into the chats. What do you think whenever somebody says there was a stampede of people? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? If I say there was a stampede. Okay, yes, I see on here, like cartoon smoke and a huge crowd. Yes. Large group of terrified people rushing. Yes, great examples. I see over here, somebody said animals. Yes. There are so many reasons why they use a riot. Okay. There's so many reasons why they use the phrase stampede, but one of the strongest reasons why they use the phrase stampede was not only to make it seem unorganized, right? So exactly what you're saying, a large group of people rushing, but they also wanted to the reminder of enslaved people to be viewed as cattle. If you say stampede, and you're not very clearly talking about people, there are a lot of folks who may immediately think you're talking about animals. If I say, wow, there was a stampede the other day, the first response, if I don't explicitly mention people, is going to be animals. And it essentially sounds like a disorganized group of scared people that are throwing a fit, that may be rioting, doing all these other things, and are not necessarily things to be feared. So when they decided to start characterizing slave revolts as stampedes, it decreased some of the impact, and it made people essentially reinforce all of the things that made slavery possible in the first place. It also was one of the higher level of reasons that some slave revolts went uncategorized, because people would see stampede and they didn't really consider it a revolt. Nat Turner's revolt is one of the most successful slave revolts in the history of the United States. They ended up killing 40 to 60 people. And so it was a huge moment. But if you tell people there was a stampede of enslaved people running around doing something crazy, you're probably not going to be as worried as a group of organized individuals that have decided very intentionally to move towards being free and have made a choice to free themselves. Not a group of people running around scared, but a group of people that knows exactly what they want and has an intention towards it. So that's another example of why when we are able to categorize the genre of something, we can also see why when it was discussed, it was minimized. I think another example that's really useful are the encampments this past year, where people were saying, hey, all these encampments, it's just a bunch of angry people that aren't doing anything specific. Now, a bunch of angry people is still a dangerous thing. All right. If 3% of the United States population decided to revolt right now, we would have massive sweeping change in under 30 days. All it takes is 3%. So a bunch of angry individuals is something to worry about. But if we don't understand the fact that sometimes those individuals and their actions may move in effectiveness based on how they are or aren't attached to something, then it makes us unable to, again, really go back and correctly categorize and know what we're talking about. So we're gonna take 3 minutes, and I want for you all to think of some examples. I want for you all to think. We're gonna think of a movement versus an organization or an individual action that you think may not have had anything to do with what else was happening, but was still important. I'm gonna give y'all 4 minutes. So 6:46 my time, or 7:46 if you're on the East Coast, or 4:46 if you're on the West Coast. And if you're in another country, I cannot do the time calculation. But 4 minutes. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to stare at the screen. And I want for y'all to think. Name, we're going to look at some movements versus organizations. And I want you guys to either send me a message individually or send these into the chat. And think of what the differences in these might be. Sorry if y'all aren't on Instagram, you just have to sit here and listen to the highway. Two more minutes to come up with something. 2 more minutes. And if you don't know, just say you don't know. It's okay. Don't stress. But just send something. I promise you. Nothing is wrong. TikTok, you got 1 more minute. Okay, I see a couple of things came in. If you guys have anything on Instagram or TikTok, continue sending them in. I actually can't see the YouTube comments, so if somebody's commenting on YouTube, I'm sorry. Well, I'll fix it. This is the least amount of tech issues we've had so far. So we're making progress. We're getting there. Okay, so Tim Ballard versus Ending Human Trafficking. And the, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's something railroad. Oh, go ahead.
Operation Underground Railroad.
Yes, Operation Underground Railroad. Thank you. So that's a great example. And looking at that, I just muted myself by accident. Looking at that and how the Underground Railroad organization is different than overall ending human trafficking. That's a very good distinction. Nikki, I apologize. I didn't realize you sent this twice. I missed it earlier. Reduce, reuse, recycle, lowering the impact of fighting pollutive companies and lack of pollutive legislation by turning it into something the public had to force each other to uphold, as well as criminalizing our behaviors around it. Yes, great example. Something else on here. Orgs can participate in movements, but movements are grassroots, aka run by people. Yes, these are all great examples. Looking at the distinction between disability movements. Yes, this is everything. This is perfect, you guys. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So even just thinking through these things, what I'm going to have you guys do this week is really start writing these things out and being able to structure them, because, you know, the more you look, the more you're going to start to see these things popping up. And I made this framework because, quite frankly, I was looking and I couldn't find anything that helped me to at least understand the differences in people's actions. So with that being said, we're going to be ending class a little bit early today. Your homework is already posted. Those of you who are not on Teachable might not be able to see this, but it's on right here. If you would like to have access to this, just join Teachable. It's free, and you'll make sure you get all the assignment access. But what we're going to be looking at are a couple different examples. So the assignment for this week is going to be that you guys are going to go through 2 of these video groups. And I think I put times on the videos because I know for me, I don't like just seeing videos pop up and not know how long they are when it comes to something like this. And I want for you all to be able to select how long you want to spend on something, but you have to get 2 of these groups and watch them. And then in 50 words or less, summarize each group. We're going to write less, and it's going to be harder. It sounds easier, but I promise you it's more work to write less, but it's going to help you guys become a lot more concise when you're talking about some of this work. And it's going to be useful to you all as well, because you're going to be explaining these things to family and friends, hopefully on your social media platforms, and that will be much easier. So one of the first examples I have is Henry Box Brown. Love Henry Box Brown. I think he's hilarious. And William and Ellen Craft. Group B, you can look at Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs has a really notable, brilliant history, and that's 2 options. That's an hour long or 2 minutes. Group C is Ida B. Wells documentary. Great, excellent. You probably have all heard the name Ida B. Wells at some point, so if you're interested in understanding more, that's a great one to tap into. Group D is David Ruggles. David Ruggles is, again, really fascinating case, and that has 3 different sections that I've compiled. Group E is talking about Nat Turner's Revolt. My video is in one of those as well. And Group F is going to talk about Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls is a black person who sailed to freedom. And we're probably going to have a whole section just whenever it comes to sea and revolts, or maybe I'll teach an independent class, because there are a lot of slave revolts and forms of freedom fighters that were able to fight at sea. It's very cool. It's very fascinating history, and I would encourage everybody to look into it. So this is your assignment. Now, while I have everybody across all the platforms, are there any questions that anybody has that I have not yet addressed? And you guys can always send me an email later. I'll be following up with anybody who's registered in the class via email in the next couple of days. But if you're not registered, of course, I can still help you. It never hurts. But at least you'll have easier access with that registration. Any other questions or outline comments? Going once? Going twice? All right, well, thank you all for joining our class today. We now have our short discussion that's going to start. If you would like access to the discussion and do not have it, you can quickly send me a message or sign up, and it should automatically send it to you all. Thank you all for joining. I am always grateful to have you all wanting to learn. It means so much to me because I get stressed out about doing these, but I'm always so excited. And we'll see you all next Thursday. Mwah. Goodbye. Mwah. Goodbye.